Thanks, Adrian, for the kind introduction. Just invite our panelists on stage, please. Casey, Pomelo Fashion, Cameron from TradeGecko, and Fadza from FashionValet. Gentlemen. Just have a seat there. Just maybe, perhaps before we get started, maybe a quick introduction from each of you so our audience knows where you come from here.
Cool. I'm the CEO and founder of TradeGecko, and effectively we provide software that powers the back end of thousands of fashion companies. So it's the boring inventory supply chain piece that all these businesses depend on.
I'm Casey, co-founder and CFO of Pomelo Fashion. We're a vertically integrated fashion brand serving primarily Thailand, Indonesia, and Singapore.
Hi, I'm Fadza from FashionValet. We're an omni-channel retail group. We gather together some of the best designers from around Southeast Asia. We have our online and offline presence here in Malaysia.
Fantastic, thanks guys. So the entry of the Southeast Asian market for fashion fashion online has essentially been the large players like Zalora, Zalingo. Zalora raised, I think, something around 300 million, Zalingo $80+ million. They've acted as the vanguard to open up the market. I equate this very similar to someone throwing a very large stone into a still pond. That creates ripples, if you like. Someone would describe as they would then disrupt the rest of the fashion industry. It's these ripples that create opportunities, and it's the area that I'd like to focus our conversation on today. So maybe let's break our chat into sort of two parts. First part would be something around about the supply chain of the fashion industry, and the second part around the customer experience and potential convergence between online and offline. So first part, let's maybe start with Casey. So Casey, you've built Pomelo originally starting as an online-only brand. Now, congratulations, you have 3 stores opening in Thailand and plan 3 more for around the region later this year, I believe. My understanding is that your assortment is predominantly inspired by the trends of Hong Kong, New York, and you then adapt for local tastes. But it's designed for Pomelo Fashion, which means you have a lot of integration discussions with manufacturers. Can you tell us maybe a little bit about how your work, and hopefully the work of your competitors, has impacted the supply chain for fashion? Have, for example, logistics players got better? Have manufacturers become more reasonable in terms of minimum order quantities? Has the whole relationship of the supply chain now been easier for Pomelo Fashion to develop its products than maybe perhaps in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you know, when we first started, that was back in 2013. I had just left Lazada, and we were using, you know, on the logistics side, a company that was doing end-mile deliveries for us, and at the time they were maybe 13 distribution centers in Thailand. 1 year into Pomelo, they had 78, I believe they said. The rates came down, the delivery SLAs came up, and so I think in terms of the ecosystem that any e-commerce company requires, that has significantly improved in the last 5 years, and the opportunity there has been, you know, really taken advantage of. On the manufacturing side, that's been a pretty interesting journey, I guess. We first started off in Thailand locally, and you know, what we kind of found there was that we thought it was going to be cheaper than China, but over the next year or two, we eventually moved most of our manufacturing to China, and there was a couple reasons for that. One is that actually China is a little bit cheaper simply because of efficiency. Labor and wages are actually higher there, but you know, they've been able to do stuff at larger scales. At the same time, the MOQs, I think, have also come down because of kind of the evolution of fast fashion. So traditionally in the fashion industry, you would have 2 seasons, right? Spring, summer, fall, winter. And more so, that has been more of a revolving kind of, 3-month life cycle of a fashion product. And kind of the evolution of fast fashion, right, has turned manufacturers towards that kind of production. So now we do, 21 days for production from kind of prototyping to finished good, a couple more weeks for the design process. So, with a small team of 12, 15 designers, we can do 400 styles per month. So yeah, I think that's changed quite a bit. And the other reason we moved to China for our production was actually, a big part of it was the availability of fabrics and textiles. We were a bit limited, and so in Thailand, so when we went to China, that's where all the fabrics are made, and you just have so much more variations of prints and other types of fabrics that hit the market faster, and it's quite important for us as we're a trend-led fashion company.
Cameron, you have developed software that runs many of these suppliers and many of these vendors. You probably see some of their struggles from the inside out, and I believe you're also on the board of Zahara. That's not Zara, that's Zahara. Is that right? Yes. You've probably seen this from the inside out. What have you seen that you could share with us here?
I think in terms of changes, probably similar to what you're saying, just the biggest thing, I mean, we're pretty global in our customer base, so it's really easy to contrast. Southeast Asia is still very, very far behind in terms of the quality of its 3PLs and the quality of its delivery services. We're still seeing a lot of brands do it themselves, which is just unheard of in places like the United States. In terms of the cosmetics company on which I'm involved in, we have gone through a few iterations, but now we're at a point, at least in Singapore and in the region, where there's some really good delivery partners and kind of logistical partners. So at least that entire part of the business can finally be outsourced, which is, I think, for a lot of commerce businesses, you don't get into business to run a warehouse. You get into business to design fashion or to sell a lot of fashion, perhaps, or to make makeup. So it's great that we're getting to a point in this region where we can kind of push that down to a provider who can focus on that. That wasn't the case 3-4 years ago. So that's your Ninja Vans in Singapore, it's your e-commerces. These people are now doing quite well. I think that's probably the major change that we've seen. That there's an infrastructure that exists that just didn't exist a few years ago.
By the way, Casey, congratulations. I think 30 days, it said? 30, 45 days to get stuff from design to shelf?
Yes.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, best in practice Zara is about 30 days? Yeah. Not bad, man, not bad. Fadza, you have about 500 odd designers on your site. I'm sure you've seen the pains and struggles that they've gone through to bring products to you. Would you have something to add here?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest challenges for designers and brands nowadays is just the cost of production, right? Still, a lot of the production still happens in China. And I think the cost of production in Cambodia and Vietnam are coming down or are cheaper than China. But the fact that you have to go there and that being a closed market and it's not very open yet, majority of the supply is still coming from China. And it's also getting a lot more expensive simply because there are new fashion brands coming up almost on a daily basis, right? And it's becoming very easy for these new fashion brands to launch themselves. It's very easy for them to come up with products, and it's also becoming very easy for them to get in touch with their customers. So you're seeing this slew of new fashion brands all the time, and it's very quick for them to go from $0 to $1 million a lot faster than it was before. So competition in the fashion industry is a lot higher than what it was before, simply because of the ease of reaching customers through social media and all these direct-to-consumer brands. They're willing to take a cut of the margin. Before it was acceptable to have a 60% gross margin, but today the direct-to-consumer brands are looking at somewhere between 20 to 40% of gross margin. And eventually, when you get to that $1 million stage, you realize that these margins are not enough to maintain a growing company or to scale further, and you realize that you need to claw that back, but the cycle has already started with the suppliers and the manufacturers of higher costs, and soon you find that some of these brands, they don't survive, and a new wave of brands come up. So this is really something of a huge advantage to the manufacturers, and I think fashion brands, we really need to innovate on what's the market that we're targeting, right? And I think you have fashion brands like Pomelo or even some of the brands in FV where you target higher margin customers, and eventually I think if you want to build a sustainable business, you have to be a lot more targeted, and you have to maintain your price point, and branding is something which is extremely important for fashion brands.
Casey, just back to one of your points earlier, you mentioned that you'd moved your manufacturing vendors from Southeast Asia to China, and it seems, Fadza, you also quite similar. I'm going to ask a slightly nasty question here. We've seen that, and I've been very impressed with the efficiency of Chinese manufacturing, the speed, efficiency, etc. We've also seen the fantastic price points and quality out of Bangladesh. What's left for Southeast Asian manufacturing of fashion products? I mean, is the only thing left is the Cambodian sweatshops, or is there something more decent that's going to emerge?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things. One of which I think Fazda mentioned already, which is the regulatory environment, right? I didn't mention this earlier, but another part of the reason that we kind of moved to China was because of the ease of transporting the physical good from China, out of China, and into the various countries that we're targeting for customers. And when we were doing it in Thailand, it was actually much harder. The systems aren't automated to do that. I think there's a lot of B2B, and now I'm switching to kind of end mile. But even on the B2C side of things, shipping it from one country cross border to another country, trying to get the returns back to your one warehouse, is very hard. In this region, even though a lot of us like to say Southeast Asia, 600 million people, but it's really very distinct markets at the time. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement on that. That should actually bolster up manufacturing in Southeast Asia.
So we're saying it's more than it's government tax treaties between the country, so they can ship back and forth quite easily. So returns are quite a large part of
the tax treaties are already there. There's the free trade agreements between the various countries, but administratively, in order to actually get the benefit of it, is next to impossible for a consumer brand. Whereas it's not really the case in Hong Kong or China, right? Now the other side of it is the labor side. Personally, I would not, go and do something that I felt was morally incorrect. And so I really think that the path forward here is technology, right? Efficiency through technology, and whoever wants to make that investment into manufacturing technology will, come out in the long term the winner, because low wages, depending on low wages, is, maybe going to work for the next 10, 15 years, but income levels are always going to rise, as they have in China pretty steeply over the last 10 years, but yet they've kind of maintained their manufacturing capabilities by adding technology. I think I was reading an article about Start Today yesterday about their new Zozo suit, and how they pick manufacturers based on the technology that they had. Now, again, China is kind of in the lead with these things, but technology is not something that is controlled by one country or another. It's more controlled by the entrepreneurs and businesses that want to invest upfront in this.
I think just to add to that, I think for most fashion brands, it's irregardless of where the manufacturers are. I mean, it would be nice if they were in Vietnam or Cambodia. You know, if that increases the speed to deliver to your warehouse, I think we would be more than happy to do that. But the other issue with why so many brands are still sticking to China is that they still have the full ecosystem of manufacturers there. So your choices of materials is a lot higher. If you wanted to customize prints or accessories, you know, they're all there and they can finish the entire production in China. If you go to Vietnam or Cambodia today, a lot of the products are still being sourced from China. A lot of the materials and textiles are still from China. So that adds up to a longer lead time in the production process.
Got it. Okay. Maybe just ask our audience here, is anybody here involved in manufacturing technology to address some of the problems that maybe Casey and Fadza have mentioned? Anybody? Stick your hand up. Gentlemen, looks like we have an opportunity. Okay. Moving on to just the second part of the conversation here. And that's Casey, Cameron, you wanted to add something to this?
Nothing specific. In our cosmetics business, we manufacture it all in Europe. But that's definitely around branding. We know we could do it in China, but we want to, different brands want to aspire to different stories, right?
Right.
And so for the narrative that we're creating, it's all about the European production. But yeah.
Okay. Moving on to the second part of the discussion was around about customer experience and the potential, convergence of on and offline. Coming from a background of online is a lot for me, but okay, we'll try. We've seen many online players, pure online players, try and do offline. We've seen many offline players try and do online. Now, with the exception of Pomelo, very few have got a integrated, holistic customer experience that is exceptional in both environments. Why? Why are we not seeing a more collaborative approach to getting these problems solved? Why can't online and offline coexist together?
Well, I mean, FashionValet actually has 4 stores here in KL, right? And I think one of the things that we find is that it's a lot easier for someone who's currently online to go offline rather than the other way around. And the main reason for that is because the offline players, they are so entrenched in the brick and mortar stores, and it's such a big business that when you start doing online, I mean, if you compare it to opening a store, you expect your sales to hit a certain level almost immediately. But when it comes to online, it's building dollar by dollar, and it's a long process to get your customer. So the returns are a lot longer for you to wait for. So the patience of these offline guys are just not there to tolerate the rate of growth for online businesses. And for us, our experience of opening up offline stores, we actually see that customers are getting very natural with their shopping behaviors between online and offline, and they actually expect a lot more than what's available now. We allow customers to pick up in store. We allow them to buy virtual virtual items in store as well, and we see a lot of take up for those kind of services. I admit that we're still scratching the surface of how to merge these two channels together, but I think eventually customers will realize that there's a place for you to shop online, and there's also a time for you to shop offline, and eventually the difference between the two will come to zero, right? And you'll be in the store and you're still looking at your phone to see if there's another color of that item in the store. So I think eventually we'll come to that point, but right now a lot of money is still being poured into at least for Southeast Asia, still being poured into getting more and more customers to get comfortable to shop online.
Can I just dig into that just a little bit more on how your stores work? So you have inventory in the stores, each of the 3 stores you said, or 4, I'm sorry, 4 stores, sorry. In the 4 stores, you have inventory in a warehouse as well. If a customer goes online, do they see the sum of all that inventory or just the warehouse, or what do they see?
So for now, they
online,
only see they only see whatever is in online on the warehouse. But
Okay.
by
But that
sep-
product could exist in one of the stores.
that product might exist in one of the stores, but it's not transparent to the consumer yet.
Okay, so in I say a high volume item, for example, that's sold out in the warehouse, and maybe 2 or 3 items each in those stores,
Yeah.
but those stores can't quite ship that to an online customer yet.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's still a hurdle then.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
something you're working on?
So that's the inefficiency of having both channels right now, right? And so we are launching a new system in October where to the consumer, if they see the product and if it's sold out online, they can actually see which store is it available in, and they can make the order online, and we'll ship it from the store. And vice versa, if the customer goes to the store and realizes that this size is not available in the store, we can place the order for that customer over the counter, and then it'll get shipped to the customer like it's an online order.
Okay, so it's almost like customer retention. You're retaining that particular customer. If they came in for, say, a fairly standard item, then rather than going to a competitor down the same mall, you can say, hang on, I'll get it to you this afternoon.
Yeah. And I mean the reason for that is that you're solving the inefficiency of having so many channels, right? And no transparency between all these channels. If you have if your best selling SKUs are always going to be the ones that sell out first, even in the store. And if it sells out in the store, the next customer that comes in is a lost sale. But you still have another 100 pieces in the warehouse. You want to be able to sell those products. So having this transparency in where the inventory is and making it available to the customer at any one time is this problem that we're trying to solve.
Cameron or Casey, you want to jump in?
I guess 2 things. I mean, that's fundamentally exactly what we do for our customers, technology-wise. But then on the, I really like the quote was something like, CAC is the new rent, going back to the first part of the question, which is, it's becoming a lot easier to get to 1 million, to 2 million, to 10 million. But the brands that we see, especially like what we call like a digital native vertical brand in the Valley, or in the United States, all of them are touching on offline. Like you look at, say, like Away Travel. I've got these suitcases. The moment they put a shop into a location, the online sales dramatically increase. So it's that experiential part of the brand as well, right? I mean, there's certain products where engaging with it and the narrative that they're trying to tell is a lot more valuable when you can do it in person. And as I said, a lot of our brands, a lot of our customers are kind of merging that way, where they're kind of starting off online just because the growth rate that you can kind of get when you're online is so much faster than opening stores, and then layering on the retail. And I think, to your point, that's probably the way it's going to go. It's just, yeah, it's that entrenched, like when you have a business model that's built around brick and mortar, it's very hard to understand the value of going online, to your point, in the short term.
I mean, I think it's actually pretty hard for, an offline retailer to stick to their guns and say, okay, we're going to build an online business now. Let's say you have 20 stores in KL, and that's your entire business right now, and you're fully saturated. And now you make the decision of, I want to go online. The first thing you're going to face is, am I going to cannibalize the sales in my stores, right? But I think, the question of whether online brands, digitally native vertical brands should go offline or not, comes back to that same question, which is, well, those 20 stores, and you go online, right, is the answer then to have 0 stores, or is it to have 10 stores? So I think the difficulty comes from oversaturation of physical retail, whereas, when you're online, I think, e-commerce as a percentage of retail sales is still in single digits. And even in the most developed e-commerce markets, we're talking 15, 20%. So the vast majority is still offline. You're not cannibalizing anything by going offline. So I think that's what really makes it a lot easier. And Cameron, you mentioned kind of comparing CAC to rent, right? That's a very interesting concept that, is kind of what spurred us to do this in the first place, which is that, how long does an online marketing payback take versus how long does it take to pay back the CapEx on a retail store? And if they're similar or shorter, right? And beyond that, I think what's quite interesting is that you can actually find a lot of synergies between the online and offline piece. So, to give you an example, when we launched our offline store, it actually performed a lot better than we thought. So we went back to the drawing table and was like, well, why is this the case? And it turns out that because you've done all this online marketing to build the brand online, you've generated a massive brand awareness already where, you know, people may know about you, but they haven't bought anything. So then you get a lot of the traffic that comes across the store, and I tend to think of it as organic traffic, right? People are just simply walking by your store, and because they've already had this brand awareness that you've spent money online advertising, that the walk-in conversion rate, if you will, is much higher than the surrounding brands that we see. Now, once they go in the store, you also have a ton of information in terms of what to place in that store, right? We put 200 SKUs in our store. We have 2,000 overall. So we know, based on the online data, what to even put in the store. So that helps as well.
Casey, we're getting red screens and time's up, and very shortly they're going to start putting music on us here. Before we get chucked off stage, just a big thanks to Wild Digital for a fantastic event, and a big hand from the audience, please, for our panelists who took the time to be here this afternoon.
Thank you very much, speakers. Ali Fancy, thank you very much.